Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Honestly, Let's Talk. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and each week I try to bring you another topic that I find interesting with people that I adore. And so today's topic is life literacy and the pursuit of happiness. And I have one of my favorite people on the entire planet here with me today, and that is my buddy, Don Vu. Don, thank you for being here. Tell everybody who you are.
Hey Todd, thanks for having me. It's always a blast to get a chance to talk to you. So a little bit about me. I've been in education for 24 years. I started off as a teacher in Oakland, California, and I eventually became a principal. Worked in Eastside San Jose. My last school was Barrett Ranch Elementary School. I was a principal there in Antelope, California, near Sacramento. And I've always worked in Title I schools, gravitated towards working with families that reminded me of my own, immigrants, refugees who are struggling to make a better life in America for themselves and their children. And my family and we left Vietnam a few days before the fall of Saigon in 1975. And we were one of the lucky families that came to America and started a new life for ourselves. And so about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years now, I took a leave from my job as principal of Barrett Ranch, kind of the same time that we had talked during that time, and we had both left the school during that time. For me, I wanted to spend more time with my daughter and do some creative things like finishing this book. And of course, we had no idea. You and I, after we had left, the pandemic hit and things, the world changed, right?
Yeah.
And here we are. Now people are opening up schools again, and my book is out in the world. So
I have to tell you, I got to kind of walk the journey with you a little bit as you kind of were writing it and getting ideas and going through that thing all of us authors go through of, is this even worth putting out there? Like, did my ideas suck? Like, do I need to do this? And when I got my hands on your book for the first time, I loved it. Because Don, I'm a huge fan of yours. Like, I wish that I was doing half the ideas you did when you were principal because they were so cool. But your book is fantastic. And so for those listening, his brand new book is called Life Literacy and the Pursuit of Happiness, which is exactly why today's Honestly Let's Talk is about that. And if you're watching, you can see that I put the link for his book right below in the comments, so you can go get your copy. You will not regret it. But I love so much, Don, that your personal story is there. Like, you are writing about something that not only do you feel passionate about, but you're living, you've been impacted by it. So tell everybody kind of what the book's about and why that was heavy on your heart to write this book.
Well, let me say this. First of all, thank you, Todd, for the support. And, the cool thing about this whole process, this whole journey for me, is that I've had a lot of people come out and really support me, and friends, family, and people that I just met, right?
Yeah.
And so that has just been really, really a humbling experience for me. And it's just a really special thing for me to experience in my life now. But when I shared that story with you, the manuscript, what I had at that point, I'd gone through like a bunch of rewrites, and I was rejected. After working for about a year and a half, it was rejected. And then, I reflected on what I really wanted to write. And then I started over. I thought about my work in schools with immigrants and refugees and my own family. And so, yeah, it's a professional book, right? But it's also a memoir, like you mentioned, right? I throughout the book, I share my own refugee story in these prelude chapters that introduce the main chapters. And a part of my hope is that, after people read the book, they feel like they've gotten to at least get to know me
Hmm.
and my immigrant, my refugee story, and better be able to connect with the immigrants and refugees in their own schools.
Right.
So what is it about? It's basically about the power of reading and how we can use um, reading and stories to empower students, especially the kids who have lived in the margins of society in schools, to help them understand themselves and how they fit in America
Hmm.
and in the world. For me, the idea Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about the mirrors and the windows
Hmm.
and how stories can present themselves in different ways for kids. And for me, that was right on. As a kid, I looked to stories and books to explore the world
Hmm.
and to find myself. And so, realizing that power and realizing the fact that when I was a kid, I didn't have too many stories that reflected that gave me a mirror to see myself in the world. I write about how important it is
Yeah.
um, to have that, to be able to have kids experience themselves in stories, and for kids to be able to tell their own stories.
Hmm.
And so, a lot of the book is a lot of the book contains ideas from the work that we've done at Barrett Ranch, and also from ideas, including your idea, right? Um, Talking about book access and really committing to, you know, making sure that kids are surrounded by books that are engaging and reflective of who they are.
Yeah.
And, we all learn from each other. And that's kind of my hope, that people take this and be inspired to make a difference.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about books being important in your life. So, has literacy always played a big role for you, or was it something that you can really pinpoint when it became important to you?
That's a good question. I would say it's been a gradual process, and it's kind of like any kind of journey. There ebbs and flows of the journey. I remember as a kid reading about Albert Einstein, right? And from a library book that I got from school. I think I was maybe fourth grade, fifth grade, but I just remember just being so fascinated by the story of him backpacking in the countryside, looking up at the night sky and looking up at the stars, and being inspired as a kid
Mhm.
and thinking, someday I can discover things. Someday I can possibly be an astronaut, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so I remember little stories like that, little bits and pieces from my past, and then just more recently, just the work that we've done together
Mhm.
in literacy with the Scholastic Book Fairs,
Yeah.
on the principals board, and that's how just for people, that's how Todd and I met and
Yep.
got a chance to become friends. We serve on the board of Scholastic Book Fairs, and that was really impactful for me, just
Mhm.
because I was surrounded by people who were, very passionate
Yeah.
about reading and literacy, and that transferred into the work that I did at my school. And so, yeah, I mean, it's
So I've
and
got to ask, when you think about your literacy life, what's a book that you think about that you're like, this book has just really, I love it, or I recommend it all the time, or it resonated with me so much still to this day? Like, can you think of a particular book too?
yeah, okay, um, yeah, A Different Pond by Balfi.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and that, and I smile because I recommend it all the time to people,
Hmm.
and it was recommended to me by one of my former teachers, and you know I read it, and that kind of started the writing journey for me, because after I read that book, and it's a simple story about a Vietnamese immigrant family just living a day in the life of this family, and I remember just being so moved by it, because it was like one of the first times that I thought about, maybe it was one of the first times that I saw myself in a book,
Right.
my family. And it's kind of strange to say because it's like a 40-something-year-old man reading this book and like first time seeing himself in it. But I after I read that, I had to I write a reflection. I wrote this reflection for the Nerdy Book Club on it.
Mhm.
And that was like the first time I wrote about what I had read, and that kind of started my writing journey. But it's funny because Jen DeBorley is the teacher, and she just texted me today and said, "Hey Don, have you?" She did the same thing. She said, "Have you read A Different Pond?" And no, I haven't. And so she left on my desk. But today she texted me and she said, "Don, have you read this book, Wishes?"
Uh-huh.
Right? And I said, "Everybody's been telling me about it." This is the book right here.
Oh,
I'm
I
sure
haven't
you've
seen
seen
that
it.
one.
Oh, okay. So this is Wishes by Nguyen Thi Van. She's a Vietnamese lady, and it's illustrated by Victor Ngai. And so Jen DeBorley texted me, and I said, everybody's been telling me about it, and I haven't read it yet, and I want to read it. So I went to Barnes and Noble today, and I picked up a copy, and I read it, and I loved it. So anytime Jen DeBorley recommends, anytime she recommends a book to me, I'm gonna read it because every time I love
Clearly.
it. So this book is just it's poetry, and it's about this family, a refugee family, heading over to an unknown world, unknown country, and just it's so deep and moving, and it talks about what is wished for during
Yeah,
this journey, and it's powerful.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Dawn, you've like we've talked about in this episode already. You've got a really personal story about being an immigrant and working with refugees and things like that. And so, I think what I've learned in my life, and especially over the last 5 to 10 years, is there's a lot of misconceptions about immigrants, refugees, things like that. And so, anytime there's anybody bringing a spotlight to what it really is, I think we have to amplify that more and more. What have you seen, not only in your own personal life, but also in working with families and with students that really resonates with you about the refugee journey?
What have I seen? Well, the one thing that I always try to remember when I work with refugee and immigrant families is that everybody's story is different.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a different story, and what I mean by that is, you can look at the yearly demographic data that you get from the state, right, about what the ethnicities are and what the languages that are spoken. But for you to really serve the families, you really have to know them. You
Right.
really have to understand, where they're coming from, understand the difference between an immigrant and a refugee,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Understand that there's trauma involved, in in some cases where families are fleeing, danger, where they've they've experienced loss and
Right.
suffering, and for me, it's just a reminder to really understand who we're serving, and to understand that just because they're not engaged yet in schools, because I've experienced it where a lot of families are hesitant to come in
Mm-hmm.
because of language issues or because of cultural issues. Um, my parents uh, never came to my school functions because they, one, didn't feel comfortable at the
Mm-hmm.
school, and two, I think there was a language barrier.
Right.
Um, so
So how do we, as educators, which is primarily my audience here, like how do we break into those families? How do we let them know we want to hear their stories? We want to bring them in. We want to break down these language barriers, because I think sometimes when we say language barriers too, most educators go, oh, well, it's English and Spanish. And it's like, no, many of us serve a lot of different languages.
Right,
So what
right.
advice do you have for that?
Well, for the one thing that I would say is to kind of look at strengths, just like what we do with kids, right? Like bring
Mhm.
them in through their strengths. And it's this is not a flippant comment suggestion, but I think food is a really important thing. Um, I was just talking to my wife about her growing up, uh, and her mom was 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 very was very active in school, even though she didn't speak English.
Uh-huh.
But anytime there was a function, her mom would bring in food, and that was a way. That was one of her strengths, right? She was a
Yeah.
great cook, but that was one of the ways for her to contribute,
Yeah.
to her child's schooling. And so she would bring in the egg rolls, bring in whatever it was, but that was a way for her to kind of come into the school and be present. And so for me, what I would suggest is to look at the strengths of the people there, um, and to just build those relationships. You start off with a smile, and you know
Mhm.
how that is, right?
Yep.
You're out there talking to parents. You're engaging, and all it takes sometimes is just a wave or a smile to kind of engage them. Um, and that goes beyond language, right? Because they want to know that you care,
Yeah.
and they want to know that they're respected. And
Well, I love what you said there, though,
yeah,
about, just figuring out what their strengths are and how you can bring them in through their strengths. And even if it's food and starting there. And I think that's a brilliant way to kind of tear down some of those walls. And of course, we got to give a shout out our friend Alice Lee. I saw her comment. She's watching. And so she says, hey, so we got to say hey to Alice, 'cause we
hey
both love
Alice.
her. But anyway, back to the
Yeah.
conversation.
No,
Don,
no,
go ahead.
no. No, I was just going to say, I'll give you an example of this. Um, just really quickly, we had these reading lounges that we made
Mhm.
um, on our campus, and I I every morning I'd see these parents, Mexican American parents, these moms who would drop off their kids, and they'd stand out in front and talk to each other in Spanish, and say hi to them, wave to them. But at one point, when we were like working as a school to build these reading lounges, these little reading pods, um, I asked them. I said, "Hey, can you guys come in and help out?" And they're like, "Well, we don't, we can't read, we can't read English, and we can barely speak English." And
Mhm.
so I said, "Well, you can help out in other ways." And what they ended up doing was that they they put all the furniture together, the IKEA furniture, which didn't have words or anything, it just had
Yeah,
pictures,
yeah.
but they spent days and days putting together furniture. And it was a way for them to be really proud, because in the end, this is something that they did, and they contributed to something that was really special at our school. So, you look at the
I
strengths
love
of the
that.
people.
Well, and sometimes people are just waiting to be asked. Like
Yeah.
they aren't comfortable going in saying, "How can I help?"
Yeah.
But when you come to them and be like, "Hey, we'd love some help here. You have a skill set that could do that. Do you want to come in and do it?" They're more likely to say yes
Yes.
because it's very specific. So I love that you use that as an example.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Well, Don, I want to shift gears here just a little bit, and I want to kind of ask something a little personal too, and that is, I think over the last year or so, as we've been in this pandemic, we've seen a big shift in the national conversation to be more about racial reckoning and understanding that. And what started with the Black Lives Matter focus with the George Floyd death and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all those other ones, recently a lot of the national conversation has been about Asian hate and people acting out towards that, whether it's because they of COVID or whatever reason, and we're seeing it on the news or everything like that. Being someone who's part of that community, what are you seeing, and have those conversations with your own child?
Well, I think, we live in a country where if there's a problem,
Mm,
then there is a scapegoat, right? There's always somebody to blame. I mean, we had after 9/11, um, you know, Muslim Americans,
right.
um, and with the last few years with the immigration issues, with the border wall and the rhetoric around that,
Mm,
immigrants and Mexican Americans, and now we have COVID, and you know the people to blame are the Asian Americans. It's kind of it's interesting because I've had a discussion with my daughter about,
mm,
okay, so what do you do if somebody says something to you about
right.
this, right? Um, and it's a very difficult situation to be in um, because you potentially could be a victim, right?
Mm,
Any time, anywhere, and you've seen that.
right.
You've seen that in the news all
Right.
over the place. And what I've been talking about is using literacy, is using the power of stories to build the audacity of equality.
Right.
And I use that term. I steal that term from this comedian, political commentator Hassan Minaj, and he talks about the audacity of equality, the idea that you're equal,
Mhm,
you're equal in this country, and you have the rights, and you have the possibilities of any other American, no matter where you come from, no matter where you were born.
right.
And and the idea is that a lot of the older generation, a lot of the new immigrants, they don't have that audacity of equality, right? They don't have the idea that you have full equality in America,
Mhm,
because they think that living in America, and being here, you have to kind of give up certain rights, and you have to kind of agree to to tolerate certain things like racism or injustice. And that's kind of why you see a lot of the victims of the recent hate crimes, the Asian hate crimes, elderly,
right.
right? The newer immigrants, the people who fear that if they speak up, then there may be some retaliation.
Right.
Um, and for me, it's different because Hassan Minaj, he talks about it, he says, no, I was born here, right?
Mhm,
And I have that audacity of equality. It says it right here in the Declaration of Independence. Um, and for me, I've been talking about the idea that stories can help build the audacity of equality for kids, right? When they see themselves in stories, and when
mhm,
they see themselves um, in stories and history,
right.
contributing to what America is and what America can be, then they build that audacity of equality within themselves. And so that if something happens, if they experience racism or intolerance or injustice, then they have that fire to speak up,
Mhm,
and to defend others if that
right.
happens to others. And so, again, empowering kids through stories, um, it's important, and bringing this issue up is important because we should talk about it,
Right.
and we should talk about how we deal with it in schools.
Mhm,
And so that's kind of what I would like to have in terms of conversations, when it comes to the recent Asian hate crimes.
And I think you bring up a good point, and that is we have to have these conversations in all our walks of life with those in our circle, with our places of business, with our schools, with things like that. Because the more we talk about this, the more we can be ready with solutions, be able to stand up, be able to hear stories that weren't shared previously that we didn't know people had been through or dealt with, or even microaggressions that we didn't know we ourselves were doing towards others. And I think that that's education that can happen in all of us. It's not a particular place or group. I think we all need to just be talking about these things so that it can stop. And as I've watched the news and been so clearly made aware of my own privilege and my own sense of safety and things like that, I watch these things and I know that it's part of my responsibility to speak out too, because I have so many friends who I know are so personally affected and things they have to deal with. And I'm sure throughout your career and throughout your own personal life, you've dealt with ignorance and racism and bias and all those kind of things. But what I love is you using that journey to impact the lives of others through your book. And so we'll bring this conversation full circle here with this. And that is, I love your book so much. And so if people were listening and they're thinking, I think I want to pick up Don's book, I'm not sure, what is the main reason why you hope people read your book? What is the biggest thing you want them to walk away with, or the main goal behind this book of what the biggest takeaway is, something like that?
I would want educators, community members, to be inspired to look at their immigrant and refugee students in a different way. When educators talk about immigrants and refugees, the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about educating those students is English as a second language, right? ESL strategies, and that's important, right? That's important because that's what we need to do. We need to teach them English so that they can be productive citizens who thrive in this country. But it's much more than that. And I think that's the idea of my book. It's just, there's much more than that. My book talks about what that means. How do you encourage and build that audacity of equality? How do you support students and families at home when no one can read the books in English, right? And how do you build and sustain a culture of literacy that celebrates all students? And that's my hope. And I hope I inspire people. I hope I give them ideas to do the work in schools, and I hope it makes a difference.
Well, what I love about your book is it's not, if you're an educator and you're thinking, well, I don't really know if I have any immigrants in my classroom or any refugees. This book, I promise you, there are so many nuggets of wisdom. And, even if we weren't friends, I would still be telling you about this book because it is that good, Don. Like, you knocked it out of the park. And so when I read through it and was looking through, I was like, it's a gorgeously put together book, but it is powerful, and I know it's going to impact so many. So I encourage people, check it out. There's a link underneath this video. It's Life, Literacy, and the Pursuit of Happiness by Don Vu. So Don, thank you so much for coming on Honestly Let's Talk today. I hope people go and check out your work, follow your journey, because you are amazing. So thank you for being here, Don.
Thanks, Todd. I really appreciate it, and humbled by it, and look forward to more talks with you.
That's right. And thank you, everybody, for joining another Honestly Let's Talk. Remember, you can join live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Central, or you can check out all the recordings on your favorite podcast station. See you next week.